And I think ultimately the monetary system breaks down, and then we'll be talking about some kind of a new system. I don't know where that's going to go, but if you look at China building its gold reserves dramatically, Russia building its gold reserves dramatically, all the countries that are sort of antagonistic to the U.S. or U.S. antagonistic to them, they're building their gold reserves, and I have to think they've got something else in mind.
This week's specials with Miles Franklin Precious Metal Investments. 1 ounce Canadian silver maple leafs for only $5.25 over spot, and 1,000 ounce silver bars for only $1.65 over spot per ounce. Call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson, and back with us today is Jay Taylor from Jay Taylor Media, and also the host of the radio show Turning Hard Times into Good Times. Jay, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, I wanted to touch on what a lot of people have talked about as the fourth turning. It kind of, if you look at a period of like 100 years or so, there are these different stages. And currently we're at the fourth stage. And this is quite significant because, as you recently mentioned in a presentation, we're at the fourth turning, which is very significant. Can you kind of outline what this means for our viewers?
Yeah, this is a book written by William Strauss and Neil Howe back around 1998, I believe. And they also teamed up to write another book called Generations. But what they've observed is this sort of cyclical occurrence where every 20, 25 years, every generation, if you will, people start thinking a little differently. I know I think differently than my father, and my father thought differently than his father. It's sort of a natural occurrence through history. And so what over a long period of time, over 4 generations or a fourth turning, the basic ideas of 100 years ago are basically, or to a great extent anyway, discarded by at that time. So America's fourth turning, I believe, is very significant because of the basic ideas that America was born with, I believe, are being largely discarded at the present time. So, for example, let's just go with the 4 turnings so far in America's history. You had the Revolutionary War in 1776. You had the Civil War in mid 1800s, and then you had the World War II and the Great Depression in World War II is the third turning. And now I would argue that the fourth turning has begun with the financial crisis in 2008 and the election of President Obama. So the ideas that our country was born with, going back to the beginning of our republic, was the idea that it was one of liberty. And a lot of the first people that settled in America were really concerned about religious freedom and the right to speak and to worship as you wish, if you wish, or not to, if you wish not to. But the idea was that we gain our rights from God, not from government. This was really a revolutionary idea. And it's one I think more or less we held on to. And still a lot of people believe that in the United States. But it makes all the difference in the world. If you don't believe that, then you have to look to government as your savior. Government is who you have to depend on. Whereas the faith in the Judeo-Christian creator of the universe, putting your faith in that entity rather than government, gave you a certain amount of freedom and lack of fear, if you will, that I think has disappeared to a great extent. So I think we're starting to see the revelation of this new way of thinking to a great extent. I can't imagine the sort of lockdowns that we've had in prior times. I couldn't imagine them happening in prior times, I should say. Mask mandates, vaccination mandates, these are things that, and I've been vaccinated, I've chosen to do that. But the idea that government is going to force you to do that, most troubling to me is the lack of free speech. The large corporations that are setting that are determining what people can think and what they have to do in compliance with government mandates is something completely new. Large corporations in conjunction with government is really more of a fascist model. It's a corporatist model. So we see the largest corporations in America now determining what can be spoken and what cannot be spoken. And this is a very troubling thing to me as a 74-year-old man who grew up under different times. So I think this is also, of course, touches economics. The way we live our lives cannot be separated from the way we treat each other and in commerce as well as on our daily lives. So I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind. But the forces of these things occur over periods of time. So it's nothing new. Enslavement, in fact, was more typical than the kind of freedom that was born in the 1776 revolution. But I think that it's something we have to get, to the extent that this trend continues, we have to be ready to live with a form of tyranny that heretofore in my lifetime I haven't had to deal with. And so that's a major challenge for me personally, and I think for a lot of more conservative people it is as well.
Now, how is this going to impact like our daily life, right? And the economy, our financial situations, right? For those viewing right now, what are some ways that they can prepare for this fourth turning? Well,
I think first of all, I think emotionally you have to be ready for it somehow. And if you believe in a creator of the universe, as I do, that he is the ultimate, our creator is ultimately in charge of our future and what happens. No matter what governments do, he's in charge. So I take personal comfort from that belief. But as a practical matter, in terms of preparing, I think we're starting to see inflation rear its ugly head again. This has happened because we've abandoned free market economics. And most importantly, it goes to the heart, it goes to money creation. Inflation is a product of massive money creation. We're seeing money created, exponentially almost by the Fed, because that's all they know to do. And we're putting our faith in the Fed. We're putting our faith in the government, not allowing free markets to work things out. And so we have this inflation problem. And so you need to take the dollars that you have, the currency that you have, and trade them in for things that are real. And we always get back to money, to gold and silver as a starting point, because, it's not that gold and silver gains value, but the currency loses value as they create more and more of it. There are other things, too, that the government is doing that is exacerbating the inflationary problem. Without a doubt, the lockdowns, the required vaccinations. I think geopolitically as well, the pullback from globalization, the pullback, less free trade globally, I think, to the extent it was ever free, and that's another debate. But as the global economy was expanding, and of course this goes, the reverse of that goes in part, I would argue, to Donald Trump's, to his trade policy, but also it goes to COVID, the lockdowns, and so forth. As we reverse from expansion of global trade to contraction of global trade, that reduces the supply of products, leading to inflation, as well as, of course, the workforce, in many cases being paid to stay at home, people choosing not to return to their jobs, also cutting off supply of goods and services to the economy, supply chain issues, which are related to the COVID. But government regulations, for example, in California, I believe it's my understanding that truck drivers to unload the goods that are sent into the port in Los Angeles truck drivers have to be members of the union, or they can't load the trucks and things like that. So what I'm saying is that we put our faith in governments, and maybe the policies that they put in place are well-meaning, but there's also almost always unintended consequences that occur that create more problems. Another issue, of course, is the movement towards the greening of the economy, the idea that we should just shut down fossil fuels immediately before we have other things to replace them, is certainly adding to the inflationary issues as well. Meantime, geopolitical problems that are arising, conflicts. China needs to feed their people. They need to have to heat their homes and so forth, and they are not backing down. They're continuing to. I think somebody said a new coal plant every week. They're constructing. They're going in terms of towards nuclear energy, which is something I think that we would do well to do as well, because if you want to clean and get rid of hydrocarbons emissions, and I think you've got to go in that direction. But there's all these different things that government is involved in and trying to make things better. And I think the unintended consequences are, beyond our human comprehension. And so to prepare for it, I think there's several things we need to do, starting with trading fiat currency for gold and silver and other tangibles that will last, that government can't eliminate by creating more money. Certainly financial assets are something that I think could be very problematic, because financial assets have been the beneficiary of the massive amounts of inflation until now. And of course, the establishment thinks that's good inflation. They're very happy about rising stock prices, even though the result is a reallocation or an allocation of wealth to the wealthier, as the Federal Reserve continues to print money. And so the casino goes on, and money is made by people who already have money. This is all social problems that arise as a result. And as far as social problems go, I think people really need to have good social networks. They need to have friends and people around them who are friends. Be able to have some skills that you can use to help each other out. So if things really come unglued, you need your friends and you need people that you can work with and live with. So those are some of the things I think we need to adapt to. We need to be ready to for difficult times as they may come.
Now, you mentioned the inflationary issues we have right now. Some people have argued that we're actually headed towards a deflationary collapse. Your perspective on that inflation versus deflation argument?
I definitely think we could see deflation in the short run. I think that, clearly, interest rates are rising no matter what the Fed does. As inflation rises, the tips, are going up. We're seeing inflation has to, interest rates have to keep up. Now, the government will try to suppress it to a great extent, as it did in the 1970s. I remember it very well. It reminds me very much of the 70s now, when the Federal Reserve was trying to assure us that inflation wasn't a problem. But of course it was, as they continued to print money. Then they tried to, during Nixon, price controls. They'll try to do some yield curve intervention, probably to try to keep the long end of the yield curve down, which will be impossible. But as interest rates rise, and the Fed will try, the Fed wants us to think that they're in charge. They're not really. Long term, they're not in charge, especially the long end of the yield curve. They will try to convince us they are, and they'll talk about tapering and reducing the purchase of treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, whatever they're doing. But and they could overshoot. I expect they will, because financial markets are so overvalued. Equities are so overvalued now. And the reason they're overvalued is because the interest rates have been suppressed to such a great extent. But now the Fed, the Treasury, can't fund itself. This is a real problem that we're having now that we never had before. We didn't, since we went off the gold standard in 71, other nations, net export nations, bought our treasuries. They're no longer doing that. So that's why I think ultimately inflation will destroy the dollar, and we'll probably have a new monetary system globally because it's based on the dollar now. But in the short term, I think it's very possible, if not probable, I think it's probable even, that we could have an equity market meltdown. It will be fought by the Fed. They'll continue to pump money in the system as they feel they need to keep an ultimate crash from taking place, which I think will also be inflationary. One thing I would say, though, in terms of deflation, a lot of people think that inflation is really great for gold. Well, and silver. In a way, that's true. It goes up. Not that gold or silver gains value, as I said, but in fact, the currency loses value. So measured in the currency, those items go up. But one thing most people don't realize is that in deflationary times, such as 2008, the financial crisis, the real price, the real value of gold went up. And of course, the nominal value of gold went up dramatically as well. But what an ounce of gold would buy increased dramatically after 2008 because the price of other things went down so much. So it is true that during good times, when you have a mania, a bull market in equities, gold doesn't do that well. But when times, when equity markets come unglued, the bond markets, people are going to lose tons and tons of money in the treasury markets, I think, ultimately. But they'll try to hold things together. We must depend on government to fix everything, right? So, and as long as the propaganda works, as long as people have their faith in Jay Powell and the Fed, then I suppose the game can go on. But ultimately, it's going to break down because you can't fool the markets. You can't fool Mother Nature forever. And they'll try to. So I think that deflation, personally, I've decided to build some cash at this point in time from my equity markets. Mostly I own most of my stocks are gold miners, gold equity, exploration, gold and silver exploration companies. But I've trimmed those back a bit, built some cash. And I would say, of course, that I think people's portfolios should start out with gold and silver. But I built some cash because I do believe that we could have in the near term an overshoot by the Fed they don't have to raise rates by very much to create havoc. And so there's no way we can go anywhere near what a true market rate would be now without seeing the whole thing collapse. And this really, having lived through the 1970s, I remember very well how painful it was when Volcker came in 1980. And my first mortgage rate was a 17.5% mortgage rate with no prepayment possibilities for 5 years. But we can't do that now. We have, approaching well over 130% or so of GDP the government owns, and then something closer to 300% of GDP that's the total debt. So rates can't go up without triggering a collapse. And that's why I think ultimately inflation wins. That is, the prices of everything just explode and go up. Who would have thought a year ago that we'd be looking at 6.2% on the CPIs? But that's what we're looking at. And I think that finally some of the people at the Fed are starting to really take this seriously now, more seriously. But if they take it too seriously and they put their foot on the brakes too much, or they take their foot off the gas pedal, I should say, and start tapering a little bit more. My goodness, 15 billion out of 120 or something like that they've committed to. So I think that if they tap on the brakes or take their foot off, if the Fed stops buying enough treasuries, rates will rise, and then I don't see where we can go up more than a couple percentage points before the whole thing collapses. And we're going to want to own gold and silver, but especially gold in a deflationary environment. Gold, I think silver would do well as well, though.
Now, if we do see inflation, it seems like you're saying that financial assets like stocks and all of that will fall more than if gold even falls at all. That's kind of what you're saying. So even gold will still be a good place to be even in deflation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, and I'm more involved in the mining sector than in the bullion sector itself. I don't trade bullion. I own some, but I don't focus on it as much as I do the mining companies. And we know from history that mining company profits do best during deflationary periods of time. Why is that? Well, it's because labor goes down, the cost of production go down to a great extent. I could see commodities, for example, falling more sharply, as they did in 2008, than gold. Gold initially had a nominal decrease and then snapped back up, and that's when we saw our first run at towards $1,900. So gold and silver will do very well. We do know that silver is more volatile than gold, so in downturns, silver doesn't tend to do as well as gold, I think. But when both are in a bull market in an inflationary environment, I can't understand. Elijah, you can probably help me understand silver. I don't understand why it's as depressed as it is. It's another discussion for yourself or David Morgan or some people like that, I suppose. But gold is where you want to be, I think, and certainly other tangible assets too, long term, because the Fed they don't know what to do other than to reflate. And I think ultimately the monetary system breaks down, and then we'll be talking about some kind of a new system. I don't know where that's going to go, but if you look at China building its gold reserves dramatically, Russia building its gold reserves dramatically, all the countries that are sort of antagonistic to the U.S. or U.S. antagonistic to them, they're building their gold reserves. And I have to think they've got something else in mind. Certainly China is an ascending power. I think basically because it's been an exporting country, its debt load shouldn't be considered as serious as our debt load is, because we have to depend on foreigners to finance our debt, and they're going away. China doesn't, they have excess reserves, so they don't have to worry about that so much. And so, I think that we're going to have a new system somewhere down the road. It may not be far away. And I think it's going to lead us back to gold. I think somehow globally we will see some sort of a system that has gold as a part of it anyway.
Now, one of the things with regard to the gold market that's been talked about a lot is Basel III, and it seems like the full implementation of this will be not until next year. Your perspective on how this might impact the gold market?
January 3rd, I believe, or the first business day in the new year, the LBMA falls under the Basel III regulations. And Alistair McLeod, who I have on my radio show frequently, has talked a lot about this. I questioned him the other day about it, and he said that the trade is the bullion trade with the bullion banks generally on the short side of the market is so profitable for them that they're probably not going to completely abandon them on January 3rd, and rather perhaps sort of slowly unwind them. And he figures that they will add equity to their balance sheets in order to do this, because Basel III requires the banks not to be able to consider these derivative assets, futures markets and options and the like, on the asset side of their balance sheet. If they do, they have to add capital to it. So Alistair's view is that right now what we need to do is watch inflation. He thinks inflation is really the key that's going to cause things to gold and silver and other things to rise. I believe Alistair also is in agreement that we could see a nasty decline in the equity markets. But Basel III figures to have a long-term impact. And keep in mind that this was put into effect, these regulations, because they realized the damage that derivatives did, the derivative markets did in 2008 with the financial crisis. So it's an attempt to try to control and keep a repeat of 2008, a massive unwinding of the inflationary equity markets and the financial markets as a whole. So I think it will have some impact, but perhaps not the immediate impact that some people were thinking when the regulations were first announced.
If we come full circle, if we come back to the fourth turning, one of the things you mentioned is to own gold, right, as protection. Do you want to expand a bit on why this fourth turning is very important? Because you mentioned in America's history, there's been 4 of them. So it's the fourth turning. So kind of your last thoughts on what our viewers should be watching out for and preparing for.
Yeah, I think basically, look, the left is not making any, they're not hiding the fact that they want to get rid of our country as it was established in 1776. We had a free market mindset. We had free market capitalism. And we've been losing that over a period of time, arguably, especially since FDR, when FDR disallowed us to own gold. 1913, when the Federal Reserve was put into place and the income tax was put into place, that was a stripping away of free market economics to a great extent. And then the biggest one was when, an FDR took gold away from the American people, didn't allow us to own it. In fact, on the books, there was I think that on the law, the law required a $10,000 fine and some years in jail if you didn't turn in your gold. Well, as it turns out, a lot of people never turned in their gold, but interesting enough, somebody recently suggested the only reason they didn't is because we had the Second Amendment. I don't know if that's true or not. But the point is, our liberties were taken away, taxes were raised with FDR, and our freedom to choose money essentially was taken away, and we were forced to use fiat money, which the government could then use as a means of taxing us without us even knowing it through inflation. And they've been doing this for a long time. Now, what I'm saying now, that was Roosevelt, I think, was a really big event. But this is arguably the final nail in the coffin of free market economics and liberty and justice for all, where our founding fathers believed that we gain our rights from God, not from government. And if you look at all the horrors of the last century, they were all governments that discarded and got rid of the notion of a supreme being. And the murderous dictators of the last century were all godless people who believed that the government was the ultimate God, and they got to decide who lived and who didn't live, and who had the right thoughts and who had the wrong thoughts. And from what I see here, with the events of the last couple of years especially, and with COVID, and with the riots in the streets in 2020, when they were burning down complete cities, and basically the left wing of the American political establishment was all right with that. I think you see a reinterpretation of history that is being taught in the schools and the colleges, universities. I think we're in a fourth turning, and I think the intent of those who want to change things is to get rid of America as we've known it since 1776. So how do we take care of ourselves? Well, again, I think we have to, personally for me, the idea that there's a God in heaven, that it looks over us, that will take care of us, that's my ultimate hope and belief. But while we're here and have life and breath, we need to take care of our finances as much as we can. And from that, I think we need to, be practical. We need to turn in. Most people don't realize that what the government's doing with money, and that's intentional. They don't want people to understand. But those of us who understand, it means you need to discard currency as much as possible and put it into tangibles, and of course keep out of debt. That way, I think debt is the biggest issue that most people are facing, and it's really taken away our abilities to live our lives in a meaningful way. I mean, if you're in debt, then you really have to be careful, and you've got to really succumb to whatever dictates the government gives you. And ultimately, that may be true of those of us who put some faith in gold and that sort of thing as well. But as long as we have life and breath, we have to do the best we can. And that means realizing that paper money is a fraud, and you need to own real money, which the markets have always determined, gold and silver.
All right. Well, Jay Taylor, we really appreciate your time today and all your insights. And I think that's so key of remembering that, God is the most important thing and he's our ultimate protection, right, in all of this, because we can't really predict anything else. So we really appreciate your time. And Jay, before we let you go, where can our viewers find you online if they're interested in learning more?
They can go to Jay Taylor Media, jtaylormedia.com, and that's they can access my radio show as well as my newsletter from there.
All right. Once again, thank you so much, Jay, and God bless.
Oh, thank you. Blessings.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. 31 years strong, A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, 0 complaints, licensed and bonded for physical delivery, vault storage, or precious metals IRAs. Excellent prices, privacy, and confidentiality. Pay by check, money order, ACH, bank wire, or Bitcoin. Satisfaction guaranteed. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs.